I build luxury homes for a living, but the only house I ever had to protect with a police escort was my own. My mother-in-law smiled right in my face and told everyone my cabin belonged to her daughter. She thought family meant she could take whatever she wanted. She thought my silence was permission. But she forgot one tiny detail: the deed was in my name. And the eviction notice I brought to her daughter's engagement party. That was strictly business. I am 34 years old, and I have spent the last 4 years of my marriage trying to be invisible. My husband, Mark, is a good man, but he comes from a family that treats boundaries like suggestions. His mother, Patricia, runs the family with an iron grip hidden inside a velvet glove. She hosts Thursday dinners where she serves roast chicken and subtle insults. I learned early on that my role in the Reynolds family was to sit quietly, smile politely, and pretend I didn't notice when I was being erased. I inherited a beautiful stone and cedar cabin in Aspen from my Aunt Margaret 5 years ago. It wasn't just a piece of real estate to me. I sanded every floorboard in that house by hand. I repointed the brick on the fireplace. It was my sanctuary, the only place where I didn't have to monitor my tone or measure my words. Aunt Margaret was a wise, quiet woman who never married. When she left me the cabin, her lawyer, Carla, handed me a leather folder. Inside was the deed, and a handwritten letter in thick fountain pen. I still remember the words that changed everything. She wrote, "This cabin is for Holly. For her quiet when she needs it. Any guest under this roof for more than 72 hours requires her signature." I write this because my own sister-in-law took my house in 1979 with smiles and casseroles. I will not let that happen to my niece. For years, I kept that folder locked in the bottom drawer of my desk. I thought I would never need it. I thought my silence was buying us peace. We often tell ourselves that staying quiet is the price we pay for harmony. For 4 years, I turned myself into a ghost at those family dinners. When Patricia made passive-aggressive comments about my career, I smiled. When her daughter, Belle, acted superior and entitled, I looked away. Society teaches women that a good wife swallows the sharp thorns to keep the surface of the water perfectly still. But I was wrong. Compromise doesn't create respect, it creates entitlement. Every time you take a step back to avoid conflict, selfish people automatically take 2 steps forward. They don't see your patience as a sacrifice. They see it as proof that you have nothing worth protecting. If I had opened my mouth and fought back during those early dinners, I would have been labeled the difficult daughter-in-law. So I stayed silent. But the silence I kept wasn't weakness. It was the quiet right before a storm that I was going to steer myself. Last Thursday at dinner, Patricia casually mentioned that she and Walter were thinking of using the cabin for Christmas. Belle's first Christmas with her new fiancé, Trevor. The Whitmores were a wealthy finance family from Connecticut, and Patricia was desperate to impress them. I set my fork down and politely said we were looking for long-term renters for the winter. I told her I would keep her posted. Patricia just smiled. "Of course, dear," she said. She treated me like a toddler holding a toy she was about to take anyway. Belle didn't even look up from her phone. She was texting furiously under the table. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just went home and went to sleep. I had a meeting on Friday with Atlas Rentals to get the cabin ready for winter tenants. I thought that would be the end of it. Friday morning I woke up early. I packed my folders, made a coffee, and drove up to Aspen. The drive through Glenwood Canyon is usually where I breathe easiest, watching the Colorado River cut through the ancient, towering rock. Aunt Margaret used to call it the part where the mountains remember you. But when I turned onto my private dirt road, my stomach dropped. The road had fresh tire tracks. There were 4 cars parked in my gravel driveway. One of them was Belle's pristine white Audi. I parked my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 15 seconds, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I could hear heavy pop music thumping through the thick cedar walls of my cabin. I got out. I walked up the porch steps. The front door, which I had explicitly locked 3 weeks ago, was wide open. I pushed it further and walked into a nightmare. Belle was lounging on my sage green sofa with her feet resting casually on my coffee table. A $200 bottle of Brunello I had been saving for Mark's birthday sat uncorked on the kitchen counter. Her Aunt Diane was there sipping my wine. Her cousin Tara was scrolling on her phone. And standing by the kitchen island was Trevor, the wealthy fiancé I had only ever seen in heavily filtered photographs. They didn't even jump when I walked in. Belle just looked over, entirely unbothered. Oh, Holly, we were just going through some details for the party. I looked at my dining table. Sitting right in the middle was a massive 12-month calendar. September, October, November, and December were completely blocked out in thick red marker. Sunday the 28th had a massive heart drawn around it with the words, Belle and Trevor engagement. They had even moved Aunt Margaret's carved wooden moose into the coat closet to make room for their centerpieces. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I forced my breathing to slow down. Belle, who let you in? She shrugged, swirling the expensive red wine in her glass. Mom gave me the spare key last month. She said you wouldn't mind. I'm asking who gave you permission. Belle laughed. It was that bright, unbothered laugh of someone who has never been told no in her entire life. My mother allowed it. This house will be hers anyway. I looked at Trevor. He shifted his weight, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He was the only person in the room who sensed that something was very wrong. But he didn't know the truth. Belle had clearly fed him a fabricated story about her family's wealth and their imaginary mountain estate. I could have screamed. I could have thrown them out right then and there. I could have caused a massive scene. But anger is for people who don't have paperwork. Anger is for people whose only weapon is their voice. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I walked over to the table and took a clear picture of the calendar. I took a picture of the open wine bottle. I took a picture of the stolen key on the counter. I even took a picture of the 4 wine glasses. Belle finally sat up, looking slightly annoyed. What are you doing? Holly, don't be weird about this. I turned to Trevor. Trevor, hi. We haven't met properly. I am Mark's wife. This cabin belongs to me. I'll let your fiancé explain the rest. I turned around, picked up my folder, and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. There was nothing left in that house I wanted to protect from them yet. The real valuables were in a leather folder in Denver, and Belle had no idea they existed. I drove down the mountain at exactly the speed limit. I pulled into a rest stop near Glenwood Springs and took a deep breath. I needed to make 3 phone calls, and order was the only thing that mattered. First, I called the rental agency to reschedule. Second, I called Carla, my lawyer. I told her about the calendar, the wine, the spare key, and the engagement party planned for Sunday. She told me I could send a courier on Monday. I told her I wanted the sheriff there on Sunday. She paused, then agreed to draft the notice to vacate. Third, I called Patricia. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice dripping with that fake, syrupy sweetness she used when she thought she was winning. Holly, sweetheart. Patty, I am at the cabin right now, I said. There are 4 people inside drinking my wine, and a calendar on my table blocking out 4 months. She didn't even hesitate. Holly dear, it's family. Let's not make this complicated. The Whitmores are flying in. We didn't want to bother you with logistics. Patty, the cabin is in my name. Of course it is, dear, she said, her tone condescending. And of course you want what's best for Belle. That's what family does. Don't blow this out of proportion. I hung up on her. When I got home at 4 o'clock, Mark was sitting in the kitchen. He had pulled a beer from the fridge but hadn't opened it. He looked up at me, completely defeated. His mother had already called him. She said it was a misunderstanding. She thought you'd be okay with it. I set my bag on the counter. Mark, did you ever tell your mother that the cabin is in my name? He looked at the floor. I told her it was ours. I closed my eyes. Mark, legally. Did you tell her legally? He finally admitted the agonizing truth. In 2022, right after we got married, his mother asked him when I was going to transfer the cabin into their joint names. She asked him 3 more times over the years. Every single time, he just said it wasn't her business. He never gave her a firm no. He never protected me. Psychologists call this the peacemaker child syndrome. Mark grew up under a manipulative, controlling mother, and he learned to survive his childhood by never picking a side. He loved me, but he was too terrified to hurt her. The fundamental problem with men who constantly avoid conflict is that they convince themselves staying quiet protects everyone, but refusing to draw a boundary is exactly how you throw your wife to the wolves. When Mark hid the truth about the cabin for 4 years, he thought he was buying us time. He wasn't. He was building a time bomb. Love without the courage to protect a boundary is just a useless emotion. I walked into my office. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the heavy leather folder. I brought it back to the kitchen and placed it on the island between us. I pulled out the deed. Holly Reynolds, sole owner. I looked at my husband. I am going back on Sunday at 1 o'clock. When the Whitmores are there. When the caterers are there. When Pastor Henderson is there. And I am bringing the sheriff. Mark stared at the paperwork. He didn't argue. He didn't defend his mother. He didn't ask me to reconsider. He finally realized the devastating cost of his cowardice. He nodded slowly. I'll drive. Sunday afternoon. The sun was shining brilliantly over the Aspen Mountains. We turned onto the dirt road at exactly 12:38. The driveway was packed with luxury SUVs. I counted 8 cars, 3 of them with Connecticut license plates. The Whitmores had arrived. Deputy Ray Olson parked his cruiser at the bottom of the drive. He was a tall, serious man in his 40s who had seen every kind of messy domestic dispute. I handed him the folder. He reviewed the deed, the trust addendum, and the 24-hour notice to vacate. Clean, he said. Let's go. Stay one step behind me, let me speak first. Mark stayed at my left shoulder. He didn't try to stop me. He just walked with me, finally standing exactly where a husband should stand. We stepped onto the porch. The front door was wide open to let the crisp mountain breeze in. We walked right in. The room was full of 20 elegantly dressed people. There was a massive charcuterie board, expensive fig tarts, and 3 bottles of champagne chilling in silver buckets. A gold banner hung over the fireplace. I had restored myself. It read B&T. When we stepped inside, the classical music didn't stop, but the conversation did. People saw the police uniform, and the room froze instantly. Patricia was standing in the center of the room, wearing a cream-wrapped dress and pearls, holding a champagne flute. She saw me, then she saw the sheriff. Her face dropped. Holly, what is this? Belle rushed forward in a white cocktail dress, grabbing Trevor's arm. Trevor's parents, an intimidating older couple wrapped in expensive cashmere, stopped talking and stepped closer to each other. Pastor Henderson, who had known Mark's family for decades, put his glass down slowly on the side table. I didn't say a single word. I let the terrible silence stretch. Patricia panicked and did what she always did when she was cornered. She looked at my husband to save her. Marky, baby, tell her to stop this nonsense. Family doesn't do this. Mark stood tall beside me. He didn't look away from his mother. Holly is right. She is the owner. I should have said that out loud a long time ago. Belle let out a dramatic, piercing sob. This is my engagement. You are ruining my life. Deputy Olson didn't care about the tears. He cleared his throat and opened the folder. The dry, crisp sound of that heavy paper unfolding echoed in the dead silent room. This is a notice to vacate, he read in a booming, flat, professional voice. Served Sunday, September 28th, by the office of the Pitkin County Sheriff to Patricia Reynolds, Belle Reynolds, Diane Reynolds, and any guests of the above. The property is owned solely by Holly Reynolds. All occupants who entered this property without the express written permission of the owner are required to remove personal belongings and vacate the premises within 60 minutes. Failure to comply will result in a police escort and criminal trespass charges. Patricia went completely pale. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. This is absurd. We are family. The Whitmores flew in for this. Pastor Henderson is here. Pastor Henderson stood up slowly. Patty. Maybe we should listen to the officer. But it was Trevor who delivered the final blow. He turned to Belle, gently pulling his arm out of her grasp. His voice was devastatingly calm. Belle. Did you tell me this cabin was yours? She stammered, tears ruining her expensive makeup. My mom said. She said it was ours. Trevor's father stepped forward, touching his son's arm. Trevor, why don't we step outside for a few minutes? Within 3 minutes, the wealthy future in-laws walked out the door. The screen door clicked shut behind them and they drove away. They didn't even say goodbye. They weren't interested in marrying into a family of delusional squatters. The collapse was absolute and immediate. Belle fell to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, screaming at her mother. You ruined it. You said it was yours. You said she wouldn't care. You said she was just my brother's wife. Patricia sat down heavily on the sofa, her hands shaking, her perfect, arrogant facade entirely shattered. People often ask me why I didn't sue them for the stolen wine, the trespassing, or the mess they made. Trust me, I thought about calculating every single penny. But sometimes the most expensive bill isn't paid with money. The bill of greed was handed directly to Belle in the form of a humiliating eviction in front of the high society family she was desperate to impress. You can earn back $200, but you can never, ever buy back your dignity after being thrown out of a stolen house at your own party. The Whitmores were finance people. They knew how to assess a bad investment. And that afternoon, Belle became a junk bond. What Patricia did is a textbook example of weaponized kinship. Toxic families use the word family not as a shield to protect you, but as a weapon to extort you. Family doesn't read contracts. That was her favorite lie. It's the perfect excuse for people who want to cross your boundaries without ever facing the consequences. In psychology, manipulative individuals use sacred labels to neutralize their victims' resistance. If you fight back, you aren't just defending your property, you are accused of destroying the family. But the signature on a deed doesn't destroy a family. It just exposes the parasites who are using the family to steal from you. By 3:15, the cabin was completely empty. They packed their bags, grabbed their casseroles, and left in absolute crushing silence. The locksmith arrived at 3:30. He changed every lock on the front and back doors and handed me the fresh keys. I put one on my ring, one in Mark's pocket, and I put the last one inside Aunt Margaret's leather folder. When I read my aunt's letter again that evening, I finally understood the dark legacy of endurance. Women in our family had been taught for generations that losing a house, losing your peace, was better than being called a villain. Aunt Margaret held on to her trauma for 42 years, not to be bitter, but to build a legal fortress for me. When I walked into that party, I wasn't just taking back my cedar cabin. I was breaking a generational curse of silent suffering. Mark and I are in couples therapy now. He has finally learned how to stand up to his mother, and we are rebuilding our marriage on truth instead of avoidance. Patricia hasn't spoken to me since that Sunday, and that is a silence I am perfectly happy to live with for the rest of my life. Boundaries are not invisible lines drawn in the sand, hoping the tide won't wash them away. Sometimes a boundary is a legal document, a sheriff's badge, and a brand new deadbolt. Disclaimer: this video is created for the sole purpose of entertainment. All situations, characters, and stories in this video are fictional and are built entirely using artificial intelligence technology. We hope you have a relaxing time.